talk about overviewing a little bit. The last handout in the philosophy section is the role of the overview teacher. And in my mind, this is really the most important part of being a teacher, is your overviewing skill. It's also probably the hardest thing to develop. Once you know how to give a lesson, it's quite fun, and anyone can sit down and present a nice lesson to a child if you know what the steps are. Overviewing takes just a kind of awareness and multitasking that really doesn't come naturally to some people, and it's so important because if you don't have a good overview teacher, the jobs of the other two teachers are completely compromised. So for example, if I'm sitting here trying to play a game like I was showing you yesterday, and there's two children playing a game of tag in circles around me, it's virtually impossible for the children who are at my lesson to pay any attention to what's going on. And it's impossible for me as a teacher to ignore it. So I have to interrupt my lesson, deal with the two kids, figure out what I should, should I have them come sit with me? Should I take them to the overview teacher? Should I get them to have their own works? So having a good overview teacher, with the overview teacher, what that means is somebody who's basically responsible for the overall tone of the classroom, behavior management, and also record keeping to an extent if they have time. But the priorities of the overview teacher, the number one priority is going to be student behavior, classroom management. And then once you hopefully will get to a point in the classroom where that's not a huge concern. And if you get to that point, then this person can do room care. It's a great thing to do when you're the overview teacher. You can go around and straighten the shelves and do some dusting. You can do record keeping. You can do anecdotal note taking. But you don't ever want to let yourself get lost in those activities to where you lose track of the overall behavior of the classroom. There are a couple of techniques for that. Usually you want to, in the classroom you're working in, find a couple of posts where you can observe the room really well. In this classroom, I actually rearranged a lot of furniture a couple years ago to make sure there's not any high visual barriers anywhere in the room. I have 3 places I stand if I'm overviewing. Often, if there's a big line for the snack area, I'll stand over here. Can really see, the only thing I can't see from here is right behind the clothing cubbies over there. But there's almost always a teacher there, because that's where our record keeping station is set up. So this is a pretty good place in this classroom. Standing over here is a pretty good place in this classroom. I can't see right behind the workbench, but there's just a table there, and I think I would know, I could hear if there was anything happening. Then I still can't see over here. And then a place that we're often hosted for record keeping is right here. We have our binders here, and this is really my favorite place to stand. I can see everything in the room here except right behind the workbench. And so that I would want to know that I can't see what's over there, but that's not a big problem area. So talk to your lead teacher, figure out where she wants you to stand during when you're overviewing, and then really, if you're like a boomerang, so you're going to stand there, and if there's 2 kids wrestling over there, you're going to, let's make some work choices, or can you go back to your work, or why don't you come with me, I'll help you find a work to do, and then you're right back to your post. It's nice the kids know where to look for you then also, because the overview teacher, at least in this classroom, and I think in the other rooms, is going to do a lot of the, if somebody runs out of metal inset paper, they're going to go to that teacher to ask you to refill the metal inset paper. If they need glue bottle, sometimes they can't figure out how to open the glue, they'll bring it to you. So having a couple places that they always know to just look for that teacher standing is great for their consistency and routine. But I just can't stress enough how important it is to sort of develop the overview skills, and probably it's something that you'll get better at quickly once you start doing it, but it's a little overwhelming. Like the overview teacher very rarely feels like we had a calm day. A lot of times the lesson teacher will be like, oh, it was so calm today, and the overview teacher's like, really, are you crazy? Because they're the one who's picking up all the slack for for the other teachers, but that's why we have that person in that role, and that would be rotated, because it is kind of exhausting. Any questions about that?
Why don't you stand over here? Why is it always back there?
Because, well, in this room, that's the tile, and the tile is where the younger children tend to gravitate. This is all more the academic area, so the
Okay.
children, I do need to come here. Plus, the lesson teachers are usually on the carpet after the first few weeks of school. There's just not as many long lessons to give on the tile. And the record keeping's over there. And the snack refill and the metal insert,
Okay.
like all the papers that we need to refill. So it's just
I just
convenient.
asked.
No, it's a great question. Oh, and the other technique I was gonna share, so posting yourself somewhere, occasionally, if you feel like it's starting to get unsettled and you're not sure why, close your eyes. Not for very long, because you don't wanna miss something, but it gives you a real good idea of where the noise is coming from. Like if it's not really loud yet, but you're starting to sense that it's getting loud, you'll know what I'm talking about when you're in the classroom a little bit more. That's just a great way to pinpoint the source of the noise and target that before it gets out of hand. Just a good coming in and whispering to a child, we need to use our inside voices, will make a huge difference. And sometimes just grab another teacher and say, it's starting to get loud, can you help me quiet it down? And if you just go around and individually remind children that are talking in loud voices, because as the noise level rises, more and more of them are going to get louder, and so if they love working in a calm, quiet environment, but sometimes they need that help to get there. And then the other technique is doing like an eye glaze. If you can imagine, just like pick a focal point and look at it, and then let your eyes unfocus. It's a great way to detect motion, like quickly. You can just sort of tell, like, okay, there's something happening over there, and then you don't need to even intervene, but move your body and go stand kind of near a couple kids if they're, I don't know, they might just be starting to like poke each other with pencils or something. You don't always need to use your voice or to stop kids from behavior. Sometimes just your physical presence, or even if it's a pretty calm room, sometimes you could even take a little short word and like kind of sit down next to them and like do some pouring and put it away. For the overview teacher, that would have to be a really well thought out choice to sit down and do a work, but I've done that, like grab the crayons and kind of sit down and draw, and then maybe somebody would like, oh, I want to draw with crayons, and then or you could say, do you want to draw with me? And then you get up in a minute and leave the child drawing. Suggesting works. We don't want to make work choices for the children too often, but if there's somebody who is engaging in one of these 3Ds that we talked about, disturbing, destroying, or who remembers the last one?
Disruption and danger.
Dangerous behavior. That's probably a good time to either keep the child with you or help them make a work choice. There are a lot of works in the classroom that don't mean sitting at a desk. Watering plants is a great one that just keeps them moving around but gives them something to focus their attention on. Dusting, any of these fetching lessons where the child's moving back and forth. And as the overview teacher, which is called the helper teacher in this room, but not everyone calls it the helper teacher, so I think overview is a more broadly used term. You can do something like, I know April is really good about taking like the 3-part cards I showed you yesterday, the turkey cards. She would keep, have the child lay these out, and then she'd keep these in her apron or in her pocket, and the child keeps coming to her to get one, and she'd say, okay, go match this one. So it's a way you can play fetching, but still be the overview teacher and keep 1 or 2 kids sort of occupied in a task. And if they're coming to see you and check in with you every 30 seconds, it's a pretty good behavior management method. All right, I'm sure we are way behind now. Let me see. Observation and record keeping we covered pretty much at length yesterday. Kat, we can talk about that more later if you want. I think you've seen some of the things we use. Giving lessons, we talked about this yesterday. Say, I have a lesson for you. Don't say, would you like to come to a lesson? Because if you say, would you like to come to a lesson, they might say no. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you really don't care if the child comes to the lesson. But if you want that child to definitely come, it's time for a lesson. Come with me. And then when you're finished, if you really want the child to do it, don't say, do you want to do this now? You say, no, it's your turn. It's just, it influences their behavior. Intervening, we're gonna keep saying this over and over. You're gonna intervene when a child engages in disturbing, destructive, or dangerous behavior. Let's all say that together. Disturbing, destructive, or dangerous behavior. Really, really you wanna limit intervening with children to those things. If they're engaged in behavior that is maybe not exactly what you're supposed to use the materials for, but they're not being disruptive and they're not doing anything to damage the material, in most cases you're probably gonna go ahead and let that go. Make a note to represent that material later. Sometimes I have surprised myself. I'll stand back and watch for a minute, and it turns out they're doing something really, like, okay, we have the rule about the work mats, right? You have to put your material on the work mats. So a couple girls in the spring had been doing this math work on a table over there, and then they look and they have this big hanging bead thing on the carpet right here, and I'm like, oh gosh, why are these girls getting their, doing their work on the floor right in front of the colored pencils? And it turns out they had brought the whole thing over with them to make sure they could get all the colored pencils they needed, because it has 12 different colors and they didn't want to miss one. So they're kind of breaking one of the classroom norms by not using the work mat, but what a great way to solve the problem they had of not knowing the colors. So, that kind of thing. If you stand back and watch instead of assuming that they're not doing the right thing, sometimes you can learn a lot about the child. And I thought that was a nice way that they were doing it. Okay, we're just going to sort of read through this list of classroom management tools. These are things that the overview teacher will be doing on a daily basis, and the lesson teachers can also help with these things. As a lesson teacher, if you have one child who's just consistently getting into stuff, and the overview teacher might feel very frustrated. As a lesson teacher, I can just keep that child with me. I'm going to give a lesson here, you'll say sit here. It's not that child's lesson, but they'll just sit there and watch me do this lesson, and then if I go do sandpaper letters with someone, they can come and stand or sit next to me, and I wouldn't necessarily mark those down in the records as lessons unless the child was actually ready for each of those. But that's just a good way. Usually the child enjoys that. They get to see all kinds of different work. They get to interact positively with the teacher and with the other children at the lesson. So that's a way a lesson teacher can support the overview teacher. Holding a child's hand. If I'm record keeping and I'm a lesson teacher, I can just have a child stand there next to me. It's not a total waste of your time just to be standing around in the room. But just keeping a child so that an adult knows where they are all the time is a really good way to make sure that they're, that their behavior is being accounted for. Having a child look around the room and see, do the colored pencils need organizing? Look, there's a whole bunch of pencils out. I have just the job for you. Can you go over and put away all those pencils where they go? And you can keep a child going for a long time with those kind of tasks, especially if they're having a hard time making their own work choices. You're involving them in room care. Those are, just get used to, there are chairs that aren't pushed in. I need you to walk quietly around the room, push all the chairs in. I don't want to hear you pushing any of them in. And giving them verbal cues like that to not crash the chairs into the tables. Positive